The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Okay. Guilty verdict.
Well, there you have it. Guilty after just a few hours of deliberations, guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of murder for each victim, and then also possession of a weapon in the commission of a violent crime. Patrick, what's your reaction?
I thought that the verdict was going to either be a guilty or a hung jury. Frankly, I was sitting on the jury. I think it's clear that I don't think the state met their burden of proof, but I hold the state to a high burden. But this jury, it appears they didn't need a lot of debate and a lot of deliberation to determine whether or not they felt that he did it or not. So I'm kind of surprised, not at the outcome, but I'm surprised at how quickly they arrived at this decision.
Yeah, that's generally an indication that they all went in there already agreeing. Everybody kind of looked around, and it's basically a matter of dotting I's and T's at that point. If everybody seems to be in agreement, when there's time involved, a lot of times it's trying to convince another juror to come over to your side, et cetera, et cetera. So takeaways, I think that probably the fact that he kind of dug his own grave by lying about not being up there. And I think especially if you rely on the cell phone times as when the time of death was, that puts him there within a few minutes. And I think the other thing is if you believe he's guilty, which they did, he was obviously from the beginning trying to distance himself from being there at that time. And then couldn't lie about it anymore. He got caught in a lie. And as far as they were concerned, he dug his own grave. And then he lied over and over again about everything in this trial for 6 weeks. They proved he was a liar, and he was lying about this. And I think the fact that he was there and there was not any evidence that anybody else was there that could have done it, that was one thing I was surprised by. The defense did not really make any arguments that someone else could have done this. We only heard that from Alex when he was on the stand. He had this theory that it was related to the boat crash and that somebody else came along and did that. It's not Alex's job to solve the case, right? But I think that the jury never heard anything plausible about someone else being there, and 2 people are dead, and he was there. I don't think it could have happened the way the state says it happened. We've only practiced law on the defense side of criminal law, and so I think we have a natural bias. Like you said, we hold the state to a higher burden, but I saw this case from the beginning of kind of seeing all the weaknesses there and the implausibility of a lot of it. And frankly, I still don't think he did it. He's been convicted of this, but I think Shelley Smith's testimony, for me, says that he didn't do it. I don't think it was possible for him to do it.
Yeah, the next question, I think, is, do you think this is going to be the end? I frankly don't think this is going to be the end. I think there's going to be an appeal based on all the extrinsic evidence that was allowed to be admitted in here. I'm with you on the sense that the state's theory never made any sense to me. It seems very difficult for things to happen the way they said it would happen. And would we have a conviction without all of the extrinsic evidence? Would Alex Murdaugh just been found guilty if all you had was the lie, which is a big one? A lot of people are going to say, well, if you're lying about being at the crime scene minutes before it happens, then you're probably the one that did it. And I get that. I think that that's a very strong inference that anyone could make. If all they have is the lie about being there, which is a very big lie, and that in and of itself opens a very strong inference that you committed the murder if you're going to lie about being there minutes before it happens, and it's your child and your wife, you would think that you would want the police to know everything they could know, and that's a very big lie. But if that's all they had, and all they had was this kind of loose timeline with all the cell phone information, and they didn't have all this information about the financial crimes, because that really doesn't explain why this would have happened. If they had only the evidence outside of the extrinsic evidence, I don't know if you would have a conviction. But either way, we know Alex Murdaugh was going to go to jail for a very long time, if not for the rest of his life, for the financial crimes. But now he's convicted of murdering his wife and son. And watching Buster listen to that verdict being read was a little painful to watch. You got to feel for that young man.
This case is so tragic. I mean, it's wild, and I think sometimes it's easy to find humor in some of it because it is just so bizarre. I mean, it's kind of an odd place, and it's sort of a backwoods in South Carolina with these people that are incredibly connected and powerful and wealthy and successful, and this rise and fall story of that this was all a house of cards, and this Mallory Beach tragedy that's involved in it. And then you have 2 people murdered, and now and then the dad's committing suicide, which is first reported as a murder attempt. The end, at least a chapter is over here. I do think that there's obvious grounds for appeal. It's going to be interesting to see that there's a lot of technicalities in any motion for new trial. There'll be hundreds and hundreds of pages of briefs filed on his behalf by his lawyers. But the fact that he took the stand, that has a lot to do with whether this intrinsic evidence was going to be in or not. And then it also has apparently a lot to do with whether he can even ask for a new trial. The fact that he took the stand, a lot of this evidence may have been admitted eventually anyway, but I don't know if he would have taken the stand if it had not already been admitted under grounds. But those are really technical issues that will be interesting to look at in the future. It's interesting to me because the things that have stuck out in my mind, there were times when I really thought he did it, right? Like you would hear kind of the evidence of the cell phones and this idea that he threw that cell phone when he was right by where Maggie's phone was found and then sped away. But then you heard that that's not exactly how that happened. And it's always kind of like every time I was leaning towards guilty, something would cause me to walk back. And then by the end of the trial, I really felt like a lot of it was so speculative and there was just so much stretching that had to be done that I just couldn't buy it. And Shelley Smith's testimony that he arrived at the door clean as a whistle and not wet after this, 20 minutes after the state says this happened, and he had to ride, and there was no blood evidence on the golf cart and no blood in the car. To me, these were just things I would never be able to get past. I don't think a closing argument necessarily wins or loses a case, especially when they come back this quickly. So I don't think there's anything that Harpootlian and Griffin could have said that would have changed the jurors' minds. They probably were ready to convict long before we even got to closing arguments. So, all right, fascinating. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this was a fascinating case. I've had a lot of fun kind of talking through these things with you, and looking forward to the next legal saga that we can watch as it goes through the process. So, yeah, if you enjoyed our videos, we will keep you posted. Subscribe so that you can find out what we're doing next, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.